Re-Zero, Side Story, Sword Identity, Part 1, Chapter 1.
Let the conference commence. The solemn and austere proclamation echoed around the place of assembly. It was not particularly loud, but that voice had the strength to cleave through the tense atmosphere and forcibly shake the eardrums of those assembled. It could be described in other words as self-confidence and ego. None of it was half-heartedly firm, but that was to be expected, the reason being because the owner of said voice was the head of a country, the emperor of an empire that lived by the law of survival of the fittest, the 77th emperor of the sacred Wallachian Empire, Vincent Wallachia, a fine figure of a man, with glossy black hair and dignified slitted eyes, his slender form adorned in ornamented attire without it being overly extravagant. He held an intelligent light in his dark eyes. He was praised as a wise emperor who possessed ingenuity and possessed every corner of the empire within his consideration. Under his reign as emperor, the Wallachian Empire had entered its first era of peace since its founding. In the strife-ridden Wallachian Empire, the 7 years following his ascension to the throne were spoken of as the most peaceful nights in history by the populace, day after day. However, capability as a statesman was not proportional to a gentle disposition. The current emperor, like all previous emperors of Wallachia, was ruthless. The fact that this was well known could be sensed from the atmosphere in the assembly hall. Everyone, the generals had gathered in the assembly hall for the conference. They were in charge of the powerful nation of Wallachia's military in various forms, and their expressions were stern as they stayed on their toes. The generals knew this. If they displayed weak behavior in front of others, much less the emperor, it would be fatal for themselves. Now then, on the agenda today, there are a considerable number of topics to discuss. A cool voice followed Vincent's words, somehow giving a leisurely impression in the strained, tense life and death air of the assembly hall. He was a figure of nothing but white, from his white hair to his white face to the white outfit covering his whole body. A great long table had been set up in the spacious assembly hall, with the emperor at the head, and it was arranged so that the seats were filled in order of rank, starting with the position near the emperor. Thus, the all-white figure was seated directly at the side of the emperor. It was nothing less than the most trusted and valued position to the emperor. Chaisha Gold? That was the name of the tall, all-white figure, the Emperor Vincent Wallachia's deeply trusted chief strategist. Chaisha, who had contributed to the emperor's reign with his outstanding resourcefulness and profound discernment, was simultaneously one of the 9 divine generals at the top of the Wallachian imperial military. He was one of the 9 people given the top rank of first-class general in the general system of the Wallachian Empire. Naturally, unlike the second-class generals and third-class generals, some of whom had been invited to the conference, all of the first-class generals had been called before the emperor. Chaisha, to begin with, first on the agenda. It is troubling that the gathering of first-class generals is the absolute worst. That Chaisha had been the first to bring it up was also a serious matter. For a fact, Chaisha's words were not false. For the one who should be the most esteemed in the empire, the seats around Vincent were conspicuously empty. That meant, it was evidence that the attendance rate of the first-class generals, of the 9 divine generals, was poor. What a disgrace. If we, who ought to be the model for the second-class generals, do this, how can we face the other generals? Punctual. Naturally, the one ferociously and the other mechanically expressing their dissatisfaction, were the 2 of the first-class generals filling the vacant seats aside from Chaisha, Goes Ralphon and Moguro Hagane. Goes, a veteran soldier, and Moguro, who was known as a steel man of unique origin, both were highly loyal to the emperor and, like Chaisha, attended the conference as a matter of course. Thus, it was only the 3 of them who filled the honored seats of the 9 divine generals properly. Goes, what happened to Groovy, the one leading the campaign, or better yet, Sir Olbart? Chaisha, I have received a letter of absence from Sir Olbart. Well, let me put it this way, General Goes knows what he is doing by leaving out Cecilus and Arakia. Moguro, expectations, futile. Goes raised his voice at each absence. When Chaisha smiled bitterly at that, Moguro affirmed it with a concise sentiment. In the Wallachian Empire where the strong were respected, the requirements for being chosen as one of the 9 divine generals were plain and simple. There was nothing more to it than being a powerful person with great military prowess. As a result, compared to other countries, the empire had unparalleled military strength, but going up the ranks, discipline tended to become lax. It was no wonder that the two Gos did not expect to attend. Cecilus Segment and Arakia, the first and second ranks of the 9 divine generals respectively, had been left out. In any case, Gos, the conference taking place on His Excellency's time, what do they all take it for? Vincent, the same old chirping and whining. Gos, Your Excellency. Gos's stern face flushed red with anger, as he was chided by the good-looking man at the head of the table, the Emperor Vincent Wallachia. Vincent's slitted eyes narrowed at the empty seats of the 9 divine generals. Vincent, from the beginning, I had no expectation of their attendance. Even on a shotrange board, each piece moves in its own manner. If one disregards that and moves as one pleases, the board will go amok without regard to the intention of the move. Above all, His Excellency did not revive the 9 divine general system to demand good behavior. That is how I understand it. For one, Vincent, His words taken halfway through, Vincent let out a small sniff. The one unafraid of impiety and decisively interrupting the Emperor's speech, sat adjacent to Vincent an aged man with tidied graying hair who sat facing the unfilled seats. He was a capable person who held the most powerful position in the Wallachian Empire after the Emperor. As the 9 divine generals were the top of the military, he was the top of the civil office, the Prime Minister Bastetz von Dalphon. Goes, Prime Minister, to interrupt His Excellency's words. Bastetz, my apologies. However, His Excellency is also occupied with government affairs. I thought it my duty as a loyal subject to expedite the conference, as much as possible. Goes, are you suggesting that we interrupt the will of His Excellency? Bastetz, do not become overzealous, General Goes. I am afraid His Excellency's gaze is growing cold. Goes, Goes rebuked Bastetz's obtrusive deeds, but the experienced Prime Minister easily sidestepped. Unfortunately, Goes and Bastetz were of different wits in a war of words. Goes had the full confidence of officers and men as a soldier who had worked his way up, and has expected his true value to be demonstrated on the battlefield, and, where the battlefield lay depended on the nature of the person in question. Chaisha was likewise more suited to a battlefield in which he was able to use his head rather than wield a lance. Mogoro, Cecilus, Arakia, those two, now, Bastetz, yes, it is as Mogoro Dono says. That the seats of those two, first and second, would be empty has already been taken into account. I think we should get into the main issue of the conference promptly. Vincent, it matters not. Chaisha, begin. In the end, Goes was unable to recover after being backed into a corner, and the conference moved on. Chaisha sighed, with a sidelong glance at Goes, who seemed to be about to break the gauntlets of his golden armor from gripping them so tightly. He let out a well then, and tried to go on to the issue at hand. Every single time, before the beginning of the conference, the body and spirit would be wasted. This too, was how things were for today's leaders of the sacred Wallachian Empire.
Chapter 2.
The term coup d'état was one that frequently appeared in Wallachian history books. As mentioned previously, in Wallachia, where survival of the fittest was respected as the natural way of things, the instilled value of taking what one wanted by brute force was encouraged. That could be land for officers and men, or plundering a loved one, or fighting for accumulated wealth. The options are too numerous to mention. Of course, there were also certain rules for demonstrating such might. Without that, a world in which power ruled unchecked would be nothing more than a lawless land. There was once a time in which such lawlessness went unpunished, but today's empire is different. The emperor of this age, Vincent Wallachia, possessed outstanding political skill. He naturally governed the whole of the empire by laying down laws, and sought prudence in how power was demonstrated. As a result, many imperial citizens benefited from this, and no small amount of relief spread among the weak. The weak who were expected to be oppressed and expended, had been saved. But at the same time, he listened to the lamentations of the strong who had been the oppressors, and improved the laws put in place. Since many related parties detested each other, and duels and the like had repeatedly destroyed many houses in a chain of retribution, appropriate authorities intervened. and devised ways to stop the flames of anger from spreading. It could be called the beginning of an age where it was harder to die and easier to live, for both the strong and the weak. However, it would be a mistake to think of Vincent as a merciful emperor for bringing it about. Vincent, although our national flag touts the sword wolf, even among wolves there are superiors and inferiors. And a pack cannot exist without individuals of various sizes. It is possible that the wolves may consume each other. However, the eating of bad meals that could destroy the pack will be suppressed. It is a necessity to make that known. That was Vincent's policy, and the purpose for the altered imperial laws. Vincent's politics kept the surface of the board arranged as neatly as he saw fit. For that reason, he did not balk if it distorted the empire's old conventions and ways of doing things, or if he trampled them underfoot. In a way, he was a most unusual Wallachian emperor, and a typical Wallachian emperor. 7 years had passed since Vincent had taken the throne. Wallachia had entered an era of peace since its founding. Therefore, the word coup d'état was far from relevant. Excluding the period immediately following his succession, the reign of Vincent, Wallachia had suffered a situation that could be called a coup d'état just once, in the beginning. Chaisha, the empty seat of the 9 divine generals, we need to fill it. Vincent. Once the conference was underway and some of the items on the agenda had been digested, Chaisha brought up the topic. At that moment, the atmosphere in the assembly hall became chilly and tense. Goes, who always had a stern look, had creases chiseled between his brows like a craggy rock, and even Moguro, whose face structure could not be easily understood, seemed to have vaguely changed in mood. The second-class generals and below without seats also felt the tension. The only two other than Chaisha whose expressions had not changed were Vincent and Bastet's, a vacant position among the top military officers, the 9 divine generals. That was not something that should ever happen. The sole qualification for the 9 divine generals was strength, which meant the position was synonymous with defeat being impermissible. To be missing signified death from defeat, and the reason for the loss of the 9th seat was not confined to death from defeat. Goes, if only Borleroy hadn't been so stupid. Goes grumbled with a disgusted expression, crossing his brawny arms. No one followed his remark, but that no one rebuked him showed their inner thoughts were the same. Borleroy to Meglif, the missing 9th general, and one of the key players who had brought about the coup d'état in Wallachia, a plot by one of the 9 divine generals, involving the emissaries of a foreign country, had aimed to take Vincent's life. That was the reality of the greatest coup d'état since the start of Vincent's reign. Consequently, Vincent had received a nearly mortal wound, but the coup d'état had ended with the defeat of the man who had been the main culprit and the perpetrator, Borleroy. That had taken place 2 months prior, and since then 1 seat of the 9 divine generals had remained empty. Bearing in mind Vincent's unobjectionable return to governance, the seat could not be left vacant indefinitely. The late proposal, it was justified. Chaisha, as there is a necessity to keep the neighboring country in check, it is about time we think on it. As silence fell over the assembly hall, Chaisha once again stirred the waters. Each person's attention understandably went to Vincent. Under their gazes, Vincent glanced over to the truly empty seat, the empty seat whose back Borleroy to Meglif had blithely leaned on. Chaisha, Your Excellency. Vincent, it matters not. I have no time to waste on the deceased. Select your personnel swiftly. Chaisha, yes. I am grateful for your approval. In an instant, Vincent narrowed his dark eyes and gave a parting shot. Having received his words, Chaisha bowed to the emperor's judgment and continued. Then, he turned to face Goes, who was sullenly crossing his arms. Chaisha, General Goes, what do you think? Are there any capable generals that have caught your eye? Goes, right. I can think of several who excel in military strategy, but if we are talking about those who could rank among the 9 divine generals, what about second-class General Kathma Irelux? Chaisha, second-class General, Kathma, Goes, who was in contact with a wide range of generals, came up with a name that was naturally familiar to Chaisha. Kathma Irelux had risen to the position of second-class general at a young age due to his outstanding talent. He was a member of the insect cage tribe, which was rare even for the racially diverse Wallachian Empire. The insect cage tribe kept parasites called bugs inside their bodies, using them from a young age, and had a special technique to borrow the abilities of the bugs in an emergency. But the problem was, Moguro, Kafma's relatives, Borleroy, collusion. Chaisha, as General Moguro says, the aforementioned second-class General Kafma is supposed to be on house arrest, is he not? The insect cage tribe were among those who had supported Borleroy's plotted regicide, and, at the same time, they were Kafma's clan of origin. Kafma himself seemed to have not been made aware of the treason, but he had been blamed for the participation of many of his relatives, and was currently also held in a state of confinement. Chaisha, I have my doubts about whether he is worthy to be the next seat of the 9 divine generals. Goes, if that's the case, shouldn't we give him the chance to redeem himself? He himself feels responsible for his relatives taking part in treason. As it is, he is even prepared and willing to take his own life. Vincent, Goes, Your Excellency. I know I am going out on a limb here, but let me just say this. Kafma Irelux is a man too loyal to Your Excellency to lose. Please, judge him leniently. Standing out of his chair with a stomp, Goes leaned forward and put his hands on the table in a direct appeal. Were it anyone else, they would be rightly accused of disrespect, but the burning in Goes's eyes and chest were nothing but the flames of loyalty and righteous indignation. Goes, Your Excellency. Vincent, do not raise your voice to me, you mere commoner. The volume with which you speak is pointless. Do not lean so far forward, your voice is echoing not just through the assembly hall but throughout the entire palace. Therefore, Vincent does not rebuke Goes with the exception of the volume of his voice. Vincent himself had told him, and Goes gulped weakly, I am sorry. Yet still apologized loudly. Goes, still. Please reconsider. The missing seat of the 9 divine general and clemency for a loyal and faithful general, the two problems should be solvable in one stroke. Vincent. Chaisha, yes. To offer my opinion, General Goes's option is not a bad one. To Vincent's request for his opinion, Chaisha stroked his own sharp chin as he responded. The surrounding circumstances had turned out poorly, but Chaisha also knew of Kafma Irelux's distinguished military service. As Goes had said, losing one of the Empire's premier generals could only be a heavy loss, to say nothing of the fact that the Empire had already lost Borleroy to Meglyph. Days after the incident, the Kingdom of Lagunica signed an armistice treaty, but even so it had been for a period of 3 years, after which no one knew what would happen. Something like a period during which it would be permissible for the Empire to be at reduced strength, would always be absurd. Chaisha, I'm certain that General Second-Class Kafma has his own inclinations too, but I cannot imagine there is anyone in the Empire who would turn down a promotion to the 9 divine generals when approached. Vincent, As expected, that is a compelling argument coming from a man who unwillingly filled his seat. Chaisha, jest all you like. I have already resigned myself long ago. Drawing unexpected sarcasm from the Emperor, Chaisha shrugged his slender shoulders in self-deprecation. He would be deeply sympathetic about being approached in such a way, supposing Kafma was not prepared and aiming for the position of General First Class. Additionally, Chaisha would be happy to see more like himself. Chaisha himself felt heavily burdened by being granted an excessively high position like the 9 divine generals. It was certainly more in his nature to handle a civil position than a military one. Bastetts, Your Excellency, may I also say something? Goes had made a strong recommendation for a new, capable person to be offered the unfilled seat of the 9 divine generals. In the assembly hall that had seemed to reach a consensus, the one humbly raising his hand was Bastetts, the imperial prime minister, whose eyes were thin like thread and whose inner feelings could not be guessed, bowed his head reverently when Vincent permitted his opinion with just a glance. Bastetts, as Goes Dono has given Kafma Dono his recommendation, there is a person I would like to recommend to you as well. Goes, what did you just say? Goes's eyes widened and glared at Bastetts, who had turned the discussion up till now on its head with his remark. Just as Goes was hoping to bring good news to the general he favored, Bastetts had tried to pluck it from his hands. Goes's reaction was quite natural. Goes, Prime Minister. You dare to meddle in the affairs of the 9 divine generals who head the imperial military. Bastetts, with all due respect, my position as Prime Minister obliges me to devote myself to the betterment of the Empire. That being the case, allow me to share my opinion. Goes, You. In contrast to Goze's indignation, Bastet's responded with consistent composure. Growing impatient with that reply, Goze's eyes quietly began to fill with fierce hostility. Like a predator before its prey, his posture showed his powers of concentration had been elevated. It meant the rise of the fighting spirit of the one known as the Lion Knight, Goze Ralphon. However, Vincent, cease, commoner. After becoming accustomed to it, your voice is all the more clamorous. Bastet, you said there was one who you wished to recommend. Speak, Goze, Your Excellency. Please reconsider. Vincent, I already told you. Cease. Goze, TCH, asked to close his mouth again. Goze kept silent, red-faced. In response, Bastet assented. Bastet, I respect your magnanimous judgment. Vincent, be silent. I will not tell you a third time. Speak, swiftly. Bastet, yes. The person I would like to recommend for the next of the 9 divine generals is Madeleine Ischart. Hearing the much-awaited name he had prompted from Bastet, Vincent's eyebrows drew together. It was a rare surprise, a reaction that would have been too modest for anyone other than him. In fact, Chaisha, Goze, and many of the other generals in attendance wore identical dubious expressions. The reason being, the name of the person, Madeleine, was one no one happened to know of. Moguro, unknown name. Prime Minister, who is that? The taciturn Moguro asked the question representative of all present. His opportunities to speak were few, and his words faltering, but by no means was Moguro not listening to the conversation, nor was he dull-witted. In a sense, he grasped things more flexibly than Goze, as he was a person who could sift out essential information. To Moguro's inquiry, Bastet touched his moustache. Bastet, it is natural you would find it surprising. Since Madeleine Ischart. She has no experience working under the imperial military, and no track record of leading a group. Chaisha, that's. No matter how you look at it, Goze, out of the question. Chaisha was convinced with the divulged reasons as to why he would not have heard of her, and Goze, who had been ordered to be silent by Vincent, could not bear any more and yelled out angrily. But for once, no one could hold it against Goze. All the generals gathered in the assembly hall, including the first generals without exception, were skeptical of Bastet's idea. No military experience, and no track record of leadership. In other words, it was evident this person had not achieved anything tangible. Who would listen to such a recommendation? Goze, are you ridiculing the honor of our imperial soldiers? Bastet, do not be absurd. I told you. As the empire's prime minister, I would like to offer my opinion regarding the future of the nation. That statement is no fabrication. Goze, how can you say such a thing? A blue vein popping on his brow, Goze's patience was reaching criticality. But before he could explode, Vincent's voice rang out, wait. His elbows propped on the armrests of his chair, Vincent rested his chin on his hands and turned towards Bastet with an evaluative look. Drawing that gaze, Bastet called to him, Your Excellency. Bastet, once again, I have no intention of conspiring against you, or disrespecting the position of the 9 divine generals. I am confident that Madeleine Ischart will surely be able to meet Your Excellency's expectations. Vincent, do not speak of confidence so easily. What are her capabilities? Bastet, she commands sky dragons. Vincent, at that moment, the air in the assembly hall became still. Incidentally, as he listened, even Chaisha gasped at how reckless that statement had been. The technique known as sky dragon riding was a special skill involving the subjugation of the ferocious and brutal sky dragons found only in Wallachia. It took a long time and a lot of talent to be able to subdue sky dragons, and those who could become sky dragon riders were exceedingly few. As such, sky dragon riders were considered useful, but that was not where the problem lay. The one of the 9 divine generals who had committed treason, Borleroy to Megliv, had also been a rider of sky dragons. Everyone, for the deceased Borleroy's position's replacement, a dragon rider like Borleroy had been suggested. Regardless of intention, his proposal could only be thought of as an act of provocation. It could be said it was only natural that the generals were speechless, and that Vincent also did not have the words to continue. Wondering what he was thinking, it seemed the area around Goze was about to erupt. However, Vincent, that is like you. Nevertheless, you cannot endorse a Sky Dragon rider just to replace a Sky Dragon rider. Bastetts, yes, you have keen insight. Of course, I too, for merely being a Sky Dragon rider. Even though one possessed such a precious skill, I would not think them qualified to be ranked among the 9 divine generals. Even so, Vincent, what, Bastetts, I have just one correction. I did not describe Madeleine Ischart as a Sky Dragon rider. She commands Sky Dragons, that is what I conveyed. With a smile that showed no true feelings, the Prime Minister answered the Emperor's question. It could be said it was typical for the sides of the conference for both to probe at each other's true motives without conveying their own. However cunning his opponents, for such a person to be placed in the seat of Prime Minister, that itself was proof that Bastetts was a competent man. Select for talent, and make use of that to create the board. Vincent was by no means himself a man of exceptional valor, but that was his unconditional method for governing Wallachia, the land of the sword wolf. Therefore, Vincent would once more exercise his own abilities to the fullest. Vincent, Kafma Irelux and Madeleine Ischart, summoned them both. Chaisha, it is no problem for me, but is that all right? Vincent, it matters not. I have an understanding of Kafma's potential. If possible, an ascertainment of Madeleine's is also required. If I am unable to see it, that means Bastetts is getting old. I am not so merciful as to provide a position for an incompetent old man. Understood? Chaisha, understood, Your Excellency. Despite the callous looks towards him, Bastetts bowed, showing no sign of fear. He did not expect Vincent to show mercy, nor for him to take it lightly. He had absolute confidence in his own judgment. At any rate, goes, commands Sky Dragons, he says. Who gives a damn? Kafma can command bugs too. Moguro, goes, that, not important. I think, goes, we do not need to rely on Sky Dragons, even bugs can carry His Excellency. Am I wrong, Moguro? Moguro, not wrong. But, I dislike bugs. Bastetts's view had been accepted, and Moguro quelled the irritated goes. With a sidelong glance, Chaisha internally reprioritized governmental affairs. The new replacement for the 9 divine generals was a high priority. He was not certain what would be the difference in merit between Kafma and Madeleine, but he assumed there was a high probability they would compete with force. If that was the case, it would be necessary to establish a time and place. Chaisha, good grief, looks like things will be getting busy. Just when the matter of that insurrection was finally starting to settle down, patting his shoulder in premonition of the hard work to come, Chaisha accepted the resolution of the discussion for the time being. It would be necessary to do something to deal with it, perhaps by saying something to Goes afterwards, but asking that of Vincent would probably be expecting a bit too much, since Vincent had already done more than enough in accordance with his own duty. Chaisha, in a country where the strong do as they please, the crowning role of emperor is imposed upon and cannot act freely. I find that rather ironic. Even so, it was a position he had desired and won, so it was an outcome he had to bear. There were also a great many ways to escape if one really wanted to. He could think of some who had actually escaped the confines of the birdcage, but, oh, is everyone here? Please forgive me for this, he spoke, just as the conference was about to come to a conclusion. The doors to the assembly hall had been pushed open to reveal a person with a light tone of voice. The man with an easygoing smile peeked inside, wearing a large blue rope that hung from his head. He was a character too detached from the tense air of the assembly hall. At this person's entrance, even Chaisha had faint disgust etched into his white face. Chaisha, Mr. Stargazer, is it? On what sort of business have you made an appearance? Stargazer, oh no, I didn't know you were actually in the middle of a conference, sorry. You see, His Excellency has kindly allowed me to stay at the Crystal Palace, but I'm basically a good-for-nothing freeloader. Without minding the unwelcoming atmosphere, the man the Stargazer answered flippantly. To that, Chaisha's response was limited to a hollow "I see." Stargazer was not a position of the imperial military like the generals, nor a civil office like that of Bastetts. It was something unusual. It was the one and only such position in the Wallachian Empire. He was not a personage welcomed by anyone, including Chaisha, but Vincent, I do not recall summoning you, Jester, save for the Emperor himself, who called out to him like that and made no attempt to keep him away. While exposed to the vigilance and disgust of those around him, the stargazer scratched his cheek in response to Vincent's words. His attitude was like that of a child being rebuked for fooling around, but the situations were incomparable. He acted as if he did not know he was legitimately riding the line between life and death. Vincent, we are in the midst of a conference. You have no role to play here. Leave, swiftly, stargazer. Of course, I will bear in mind my own position. Since it is at Your Excellency's mercy that I am allowed to stay here. But, I have to play my part, Vincent, ho. At his refusal, Vincent closed one eye and let out an interested puff of air. At the same time, Chaisha and the other generals went on guard all at once. No one liked or trusted this stargazer, but the prophecy the stargazer would bring was a different story. Vincent, you could not even foresee Borleroy's treasonous plot, so what have you seen this time? If you cannot say something beneficial, expect to have your slender neck wrung. Stargazer, please don't say such scary things. As you can see, I'm just a stick of a man. If I'm threatened like that, my knees will break from shaking. Goes, enough of your nonsense. His Excellency demands an answer. Hurry up and answer him. Stargazer, you were. The stargazer suffered Vincent's threat and Goz's enraged shouting. He jumped back in an exaggerated manner, and gave a strained smile under the general's gaze. Stargazer, it looks like I'm not welcome here. So I'll do as you said. Your Excellency, if you're having any problems, it seems your troubles will soon be over. Vincent. What do you mean? Stargazer, if someone is competing for supremacy, this is the best opportunity to do it. It's a little hazy, but I think that's about all I can say. Vincent, is that so? Moguro, sharpen your arm. Moguro, understood. His head tilted in thought. The stargazer spoke those words, and Vincent nodded and gave the command to Moguro. Heeding the command, Moguro raised his huge arm, and the mineral-like smooth arm slowly transformed, and started steadily sharpening to a spear-like point. Even Chaisha knew that Moguro's arm was as sharp and dangerous as a sword. With an arm that could easily cut through solid stone, he could probably take off the heads of 10 stargazers at once. Stargazer, Your Excellency? You're not seriously going to execute me? Vincent, nonsense, why would I do such a thing? First, let us start with the fingers. Stargazer, surely Your Excellency must also know that information obtained from torture is worthless? Vincent, with those who hold their tongues like you, firstly it is vital to make them speak. After they do so, one can examine the content with care. Is that not correct? Vincent's severe and rational conclusion caused the stargazer to shrink away, and his back hit the wall. Moguro, standing more than 3 meters tall, approached the cornered stargazer. Under that oppression, the stargazer looked around as if searching for aid but goes, we must not allow the assembly room to get stained with blood. Somebody go get a sheet. Goes in particular acted as though the torture were a decided matter, and there was no indication anyone would help. Of course, Chaisha was the same. There was no reason for him to oppose Vincent and side with the stargazer. As it stood, the time when the stargazer's fingers would become shorter than the average person's was at hand. Messenger, excuse me for interrupting the meeting. There is something I must report. Thus, following the stargazer, a messenger burst into the assembly hall, and the bloody situation was temporarily shelved.
Chapter 3.
Fluttering, white and yellow butterflies flitted about before their eyes. They gazed at the 2 butterflies, and their aimless, irregular movements fluttering their wings in midair, and pondered what was actually the relationship between the 2 of them. Thinking without puzzling over it, they were probably family? But how could butterflies of differing colors, white and yellow, be blood relatives? Could they have inherited the characteristics of their parents, like humans do with hair color? But I feel like butterflies basically stick with their own kind. If it were a human and a demi-human, they had similar forms and would be able to communicate with language, so love could sprout between them, and a child might be born. The same could be said for butterflies, but strangely enough, they didn't get the sense that those types of living creatures mated with species different from their own, like how birds also paired with similar birds, not different birds. Oh, but cats and dogs aren't like that. Am I overthinking it? Absorbed in their thoughts, they kept racking and racking their brain to the limit, and then they withdrew from attempting the difficult unanswered question. What if they abandoned the possibility of the two butterflies being family, and saw them as sworn enemies? Thinking of it that way, it was curious that the dance of the butterflies, irregularly changing places with each other, looked like a life and death battle where none did concede an inch. They also became curious about the techniques used by butterflies. Although human eyes could not see the regularity of it, perhaps butterflies use a sort of insect-killing martial art. If learned, there may be an opportunity to make use of it in their own swordsmanship. Speaking of, it seems like the insect cage tribe can come to a mutual understanding with their own bugs, though I don't think there's anyone who has a butterfly. If there were, my troubles would be solved. Basically, they had heard that the bugs the insect cage tribe allowed to parasitize their bodies were mostly aggressive types. But if it were a butterfly that used insect-killing martial arts, wouldn't that be sufficient qualification to be counted among the strong? Preferably, they wanted to observe more closely, and turned their attention towards the butterflies. In a flash, red flames poured down from on high, and the field of flowers was instantly consumed. The idyllic scene from a moment before vanished without a trace, flowers reduced to ash by the licking tongues of flames. The world that had been painted in gentle hues of blue, green, and yellow, had been swallowed up and repainted into a red hellscape. It was not just plants and flowers, starting with the butterflies, various bugs and animals had been turned to ashes in an instant, and the reason behind it was, a violent greeting as usual. The young man with swaying blue hair looked back at the scorched field of flowers from a bit of a distance, shrugging his shoulders. Before his eyes, standing in the middle of the burning field uncaring of the scorching flames, was a half-naked young lady. Her outfit left her dark skin mostly exposed, herself possessing floppy dog ears and silver hair, and an eye patch concealing her left eye. She was the one responsible for the burned field of flowers. Her name was, Anya. No, it's Arakia. Don't make me keep saying it. When called Anya, it was immediately refuted with an unhappy look by this girl Arakia. He heard her answer, but the young man answered back no, shaking his head. And so, without stopping his shaking, young man, sorry, but that's what I've called you since we were kids, right? I can't correct it now, my mouth has already learned this movement by heart. Arakia, so, since forever, I've been saying, young man, yeah, I know. So I've also been saying since forever, right? If Anya beats me, I'll humbly correct myself. And yet, Arakia, and yet, young man, and yet, isn't it Anya's fault for not beating me all this time? If you say it's my fault, I can only say I'm sorry for being too strong, yeah? He closed one eye and smiled charmingly at her. At that, Arakia's face filled with rage, her whole body exuding fighting spirit and creating a frightening atmosphere. Seeing that, the young man let out an "oh dear," and once more opened both hands in front of his chest. Young man, come on, look, it's not safe here. Arakia, butterflies, fluttering, the white and yellow butterflies flew up from his open hands. When Arakia had rushed in along with her flames, he had promptly covered them with his hands and protected the two butterflies. Had he abandoned them, they likely would have burned along with the flower field. Young man, it'd be a bummer to have a long-awaited one-on-one duel spoiled by an interruption. If you consider yourselves indebted to me, I'd certainly like to hear who wins. White and yellow, the conclusion of the battle of two butterflies and what had led to it in the first place. It must surely be a delightful story, and the young man's curiosity was inexhaustible. But it seemed hearing the rest of the story would be difficult, and the young man sighed as he sliced through an oncoming ball of flames. Young man, really Anya, you've been tactless since you were a kid, you know. Arakia, I was never Anya in the first place. Young man, say what you want, but you're rather proud of it, aren't you? Waving his drawn sword, the young man grinned at Arakia with her hand turned toward him. At his remark, Arakia gave a baffled expression, but the answer was plain. Anyhow, young man, since I, Cecilis Segmund, the leading star of this world, personally gave that name to you, you can loudly and proudly call yourself Anya, Arakia, Cecilis. I'll kill you, Cecilis, ha 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 ha. There you go again, talking about something you can't do. Laughing at the straightforward comment, the young man Cecilis Segmund ferociously charged into the destructive force of nature that rained down incessantly. On one hand, a deadly swordsman who cut through the destruction with the help of the two katanas on his waist. On the other hand, a beautiful deviant who manipulated nature at will and twisted the way of the world. These were the Wallachian Empire's 9 divine generals, first and second ranked.
Chapter 4.
Cecilis, wow, Anya, you've gotten strong. Look, my kimono has a few scorch marks here and there. This will be super hard to send off for repairs. Arakia, yeah, well, Cecilis, so, as usual, I'll leave the mending to you. You'll be repairing what you burned and tore yourself, so don't complain. Arakia, fuck off and die, Cecilis. Arakia spat a curse, lying sprawled on the burnt field. But the curse's main target looked unconcerned, as if he had heard nothing. Beyond the effect of the curse, hostility and murderous intent were overflowing, and he was calm in the face of that, so cursed words were nothing significant. After all, Cecilis, it's bad luck to say small fry lines like die and fuck off. If you lower your own value as an actress, the roles that come your way will be unimportant. Arakia, again, you make no sense. Cecilis, I don't think I'm saying anything that difficult though. Big shots only say big shot things. Small fry only say small fry things. That's how the world works, so paradoxically people who can say cool things are cool. Cecilis held up a finger as he spoke of his own philosophy. He plopped down cross-legged next to the fallen Arakia. Though he was dirtied with ash and soot all over, he bore no conspicuous wounds. Considering that, the area around them looked desolated as far as the eye could see, much like it had been carpet-bombed by magic stone artillery. It was hard to believe they had rampaged in the hypocenter. Cecilis, I can even dodge the rain if I really try, you know. Arakia, no matter how you look at it, that's a lie. Cecilis, so what? It's up to yourself whether it's a lie or not, I say. You can't do what you think you can't do. As long as you think you can't, you'll never be able to slice through clouds. Carping at the weak objection, Cecilis unsheathed the katana on his waist as he sat. In a flash of lightning that left even the sound behind, the force from the drawn blade rose into the sky, and the thick clouds above the pair of them were cleaved in twain right down the middle. Arakia, slicing clouds. Cecilis, well, it's a bit of a startling feat, isn't it? But if I had said that I couldn't reach the clouds or whatever, I wouldn't have been able to do it ever. Arakia, Cecilis, so Anya, instead of saying die, or I'll kill you, you should speak with a more solid sense of purpose. You have a goal, right? As he peered at her face lying on the ground, she turned away as if the gaze made her uncomfortable. He leaned over further, trying to study her face, and Arakia finally flipped over. Amazed, Cecilis smiled broadly at the young lady's extreme attitude. A clash between two of the 9 divine generals, which considering the surroundings was nothing but an inconvenience to others. It was a common occurrence between Cecilis and Arakia. There were various reasons for the 9 divine generals to fight one another, but Arakia fought Cecilis to challenge the ranking order. The 9 divine generals were ranked in order of strength from the lowest number, so the only person above the second rank, Arakia, was Cecilis. That was to say, Arakia wanted the seat of the first. By obtaining that seat, she would be able to make her wish come true, or some such. Cecilis, I'm also rooting for Anya's wish to come true. I won't go easy on you though. Arakia, still hate you. Cecilis, oh no, I get it. But I don't mind you hating me, in fact I like it. As he spoke, Cecilis took off the outer layer of his kimono, and gently laid it over Arakia's prone figure. He was aware she would not like it, but in the midst of battle he couldn't worry about the clothes she wore. Since her light dress by nature was tempting, he would feel sorry for those around if he did not take care. Cecilis, even though Anya's an especially beautiful woman, you have zero consideration, huh? If the other soldiers started feeling strange and turned the tables, you wouldn't even be affected by their eyes. Arakia, what you're saying, I've no idea. Cecilus, that you don't get it is the problem, I think. Is it that the master of your heart has left you alone all these years, and no one has taught you anything? Do you want me to train you? Woof woof, woof woof. Arakia, his outer garment wrapped around her shoulders, Arakia sat up and seriously glowered at him. In return for his courtesy, Cecilus was left in a lurch. Although he did not know the difficulty of being treated with kindness by an opponent he could not win against, he could imagine it. Cecilus, I wonder whether being comforted by Sword Saint Dono would be tough. Normally if someone you like is kind to you, you'd be happy even if you're frustrated, right? Arakia, hate you, Cecilus, oof, so stubborn. I'll leave this one to Chaisha after all. When troubled, Cecilus decided to rely on Chaisha, the person he wholeheartedly trusted to solve his problems. Once his mind was made up, Cecilus would act quickly. Just like a bolt of lightning. Cecilus, well then, I'll bring Anya back too. Oh? Come to think of it, it seemed like there was something going on at the castle today. G. General Cecilus. General Arakia. Are you all right? Cecilus, oh, over here. Over here. Turning his head, Cecilus waved to the voice, smiling broadly. Then, an imperial soldier gingerly set foot onto the burnt field. The young soldier looked around. Young soldier, what on earth? What happened? Cecilus, no need to worry. This area is Anya's estate, we're just using a place left untouched for our duel. Young soldier, General Arakia. Hearing this, the soldier's face stiffened and his eyes turned to Arakia, who had not responded. She just stared at the ground, pouting, dissatisfied with her defeat. A charred and desolate wasteland, that was the guaranteed damage each time Arakia messed with Cecilus. It was not so much Cecilus, but when Arakia raged it was like a natural disaster occurred, so flashy damage was unavoidable. The environmental damage was egregious, that excluding battlefields, Arakia's destructive activity was basically only permitted on private land she had attained through her own efforts. Cecilus, it's by direct order from His Excellency. That's why I live in a shack on Anya's property. Young soldier, I see, huh? A shack? Cecilus, yep. Look, see over there? That's where it is. Cecilus pointed out a place a ways away to the astonished imperial soldier. Near a forest and a flowing stream was a shack, that was Cecilus' dwelling. In addition, a similar shack sat on the opposite side of the grounds, which was Arakia's residence, so the top 2 of the 9 divine generals each lived in their own hovel. Young soldier, the 2 strongest of the empire, in that sort of place? Cecilus, because I buy all the treasured and excellent swords from all ages and places that I can get my hands on, which uses my entire salary. In Anya's case, it's because she doesn't care. Young soldier, you live together? Arakia, no. He was not sure if he was right to, but curiosity got the better of the soldier and so he asked the question. Arakia was quicker than Cecilus to deny his suspicion. In fact, though they lived on the same land they did not live together, so it was the correct answer. Actually, as to why Cecilus lived on Arakia's property. Cecilus, that's also His Excellency's order. See, if I lived in a bad place, and Anya's temper exploded, it would cause a wide range of damage, right? Since that's the case, if I'm always within Anya's reach, the only one in danger will be me, he said. Young soldier, excuse me. My comprehension is poor, so I don't understand what you mean. Cecilus, ha, His Excellency's judgment seems poor, right? There's probably more to His Excellency's words, but I haven't heard details so I'm not sure. With a cheerful pat on the shoulder of the bewildered soldier, Cecilus smiled at him apologetically. Honestly, not comprehending it was understandable. It was just that Cecilus had been living this way for many years, so he was not bothered by it now. Arakia, so, what do you want? And just as the bewildered soldier looked about to pass out, Arakia asked the reason for his visit. To her query, the soldier replied that's right, and regained his energy as if he had been rescued. And then, young soldier, General Cecilus Segment and General Arakia, an urgent summons has come for both of you. Please hurry to the imperial capital's Crystal Palace right away. Cecilus, the Crystal Palace. Ah. By the way, is there a conference today? I always just doze off when I go, so lately I haven't been getting invited. Arakia, me too, young soldier. I haven't heard much about that situation, but this time is different. Ignoring Cecilus and Arakia's replies, the soldier straightened up and his face became stiff. Seeing the rising tension and unease in his expression, Cecilus moistened his lips with his tongue. For some reason, it seemed a problem had occurred. Cecilus, Walleroy-san just did all that not too long ago. What's going on in Wallachia all of a sudden, huh? Maybe the start of a war? Arakia, the Empress election ceremony, would be enough. Cecilus, I guess I see Anya's point, but I'll be off my game, you know. My pent-up frustration was cleared away by Sword Saint Dono, so. Sorry, when two generals started conversing, there was no reason a foot soldier should interrupt. While apologizing for interfering, the soldier said no, with a shake of his head. Young soldier, the situation calls for both of your strengths. Cecilus, oh ho, what for? Arakia, that's. The soldier paused there, swallowed his saliva in one gulp and continued. The situation that he had introduced that required the strength of both Cecilus and Arakia, it was, young soldier, the seventh of the 9 divine generals, General Yorna Mishigia has raised a rebellion.